Students demanding action. A Kenyan activist at COP26 in Glasgow.
The decisions you make here will help determine whether children will have food and water.
How climate change is affecting
On television, a teenager from Pakistan.
Right now we have a choice, either to silently watch our futures burn down, our futures get destroyed, or to take action right now.
In Beijing, students working towards the future.
因为我们提出碳中和的目标，距现在其实只有38年了。这个碳中和的目标是需要我们这一代年轻人发挥自己的聪明才智去实现的。
Climate change. It's the crisis of their generation, but can they find solutions? Welcome to CGTN America's Global Action Initiative 2021, Project Earth, focusing on climate change. I'm Anand Naidu. All this week, we've presented the climate crisis around the world and explored potential solutions and innovations as part of CGTN America's decade-long dedication to this critical topic. Over the next hour, we'll hear from young people, the generation that will inherit a much warmer Earth and the consequences, discuss China's progress towards achieving carbon neutrality, and highlight sustainable solutions. We begin with a keynote speech from Siddharth Chatterjee. He's the United Nations Resident Coordinator in China.
The CGTN Global Action Initiative is dedicated to addressing the world's most pressing issues through mutual understanding, showcasing positive outcomes, offering example solutions to help all people. In 2021, the Global Action Initiative will focus on the climate crisis, aiming to deliver comprehensive and international perspectives on this pressing worldwide challenge. My hope is for audiences not just to be better informed, but generate momentum needed towards greater climate action from all sectors of society. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has made it clear that the climate crisis now presents a code red for humanity, and making peace with nature remains the most defining and urgent task of the 21st century. 2021 is also been one of the warmest years on record, and people around the world are suffering from more frequent extreme weather events. However, the scientists tell us that it is not too late to keep alive the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. This enormous feat will require a massive transition in how economies work and populations live every day. Seismic shifts in innovations, investments, and technologies will be needed. Governments, businesses, and NGOs all have a role to play in cooperating, facilitating our transition to a green, low-carbon future. And young people will inherit the planet of tomorrow and must be firmly placed at the center of decision-making while contributing their considerable talents and energies towards climate action. The Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda remain our blueprint for solutions in the world. And to this, I would have to add that we have to avoid geopolitical games. Governments all over the world have lives to improve, economies to develop, borders to secure, infrastructure to build, and dreams to fulfill. Today, the world must tackle the misery and the needs of millions of people displaced from their lands by conflict, instability, poverty, and climate change. We need the great powers everywhere to lead the way, buoyed by an international order based on multilateralism. As China's President Xi Jinping has said at the April 2021 World Forum, that by setting sail together, we could ride the wind, break the waves, and brave the journey of 10,000 miles. We may at times encounter stormy waves and dangerous rapids, but as long as we pool our efforts and keep the right direction, the giant vessel of human development will stay on an even keel and sail towards a brighter future, unquote. But we will need solidarity and compassion for one another to achieve the climate action together. Thank you.
Our next keynote speech comes from Manuel Pulgar Vidal. He's a global leader on climate and energy at the World Wildlife Fund. He addresses efforts for achieving net zero.
Thank you for inviting me, CGTN Global Action Initiative. I would like to share with you some ideas on why we should keep optimism in relation to climate change and what else we must do in relation to that. There is one element in which probably we haven't thought enough, that it is how much the world has been able to define a clear and undoubtedly collective vision. Nobody is doubting that we must not raise temperature in more than 1.5 by the end of the century. That the only way to do that, it is by achieving a net zero and resilient economy by half of the century. And again, the only way to get there, it is by halving emissions by 2030, by recognizing that we are in a decisive decade. And that is key, because those elements are moving the new conditions for the economy of the world, and that is happening. Based in that collective vision of the world, we should keep our effort with some concrete actions. I am Climate and Energy Global Lead with WWF International, and we believe in the following agenda. Government needs to raise ambition. We are not yet on track. We are still expecting new and already enhanced NDCs on the table. Business, you have to move your plans to get a real net zero. That means real and absolute emission reductions. No excuses, no backsliding, no false doors. That is key. Third, finance. It is about funds for sure, money flow, but it is more than that. It is about transparency and disclosure. And you have to align your portfolios into the 1.5 threshold. Subnational governments, we must continue building smart cities, sustainable cities. And people, also it is in our own behavior, the responsibility to change the world. So if we are able to address this package with the different actors all together, we can move the world to achieve what it has, fortunately, the collective vision that I mentioned. Thank you very much.
We now turn to Gong, the Chinese ambassador to the United States. He answers questions from students in Washington, D.C. and China about climate change.
气候变化是中美合作的一个重要的领域。那么，除了在两国政府之间的合作外，是否有其他的途径可以让全社会广泛参与，尤其是我们年轻一代也参与到这一项伟大的人类事业中呢？谢谢大使。
请问是否可以加强中美青年大学生之间关于对气候变化努力方面的交流与合作？
I would ask, what are you doing to raise awareness and educate the youth about this issue?
Climate change is a common challenge for all mankind. It has caused many natural disasters around the world. What will our future look like? Is it a scorched earth, cyberpunk, or space pastoral? Will climate change bring a disruptive impact on future life? The answer depends on the choices and efforts of each of us, especially the younger generation. Young people are involved in and benefit from the efforts to counter climate change. You should also advocate for and lead in building an ecological civilization. Our climate awareness and behavior patterns will shape the future climate footprint. Your lifestyle will profoundly affect the future of generations to come, and your concern and willingness to act will herald the hope for a global low-carbon transition. I see that more and more young people in China and America regard the low carbon use as the new cool and the new fashion. Shared bicycles, electric scooters, shared power banks, online tree planting campaign are becoming part of your daily life. We Chinese often say, do not leave a good undone because it is a small good. You can all start to act from small things, from yourselves and from your daily life. For example, you can choose green commuting, less driving, more carpooling, and more cycling. You can also buy small displacement cars or new energy vehicles. The US has pledged that 50% of its car sales by 2030 will be electric vehicles. I hope that American young people will do your part to make it more than that. In addition, you can also start from finishing your meal and reducing waste. Remember to turn off the lights when you leave home or office, and set your air conditioner 1 degree higher in summer. If anyone can pitch in and influence the people around you, it will reduce a lot of burden on the planet. In the final analysis, green and low carbon development depends on technological innovation. You can further explore these fields and work on innovation of technologies. Young people can also be very important in social oversight to push the governments to protect the environment and fulfill emission reduction commitments. Chinese and American youth should strengthen communication and exchanges. Last month, Tsinghua University co-organized a Sino-American youth dialogue on making carbon neutral, youth in action. The Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, initiated by Tsinghua, organized the Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Future. Both were very good platforms for youth dialogue on climate, and 15 world-class universities from 9 countries in 6 continents participated. I hope that young people around the world can all join in such efforts, advocate for and shape a green lifestyle, so that everyone can do his or her part. I myself and the Chinese Embassy in the US will support and help Chinese and American youth to have more communication. Each generation surpasses the preceding one. I believe that the talents, dedication, and hard work of the young generation will converge into a tremendous force to protect our shared home on Earth and deliver a bright future of the world.
Thousands of students from around the world are in Glasgow, Scotland, for what's considered the Great Last Hope, the United Nations climate conference known as COP26. Young people are calling on world leaders to accelerate efforts to stop global warming. CGTN's Jung Nini brings us this report.
What do we want? Climate justice! Young climate activists are here in Glasgow from all over the world. The most recognizable face is probably Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist who sparked international movement with her blunt approach lashed out at COP26.
We say no more blah, 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 no more exploitation of people and nature and the planet.
But she's not alone. Other young climate activists share their thoughts in Glasgow. Coming from the mountains of Trinidad and Tobago, Shandell O'Neill experienced firsthand how extreme weather is changing her life.
2014, a bushfire in my area. Climbed up one mountain and then came down and burned the mountain behind my house and got close enough to burn parts of my roof. Luckily enough, my neighbors intervened and I came back home after university and graduated. I decided to get involved myself, so I started volunteering at the Funds of Anti-Forestation project, planting trees, maintaining fire trails.
Growing up close to nature has led her to feel its changes most acutely and the anxiety to take the future into her own hands.
We have to meet the world leaders who have all the power right now so they could understand we're not trying to take the power, we're just trying to share it equally and fairly because we are inheriting the problem that we didn't create.
Despite agreements on deforestation and methane at COP26, much needed money for poorer countries is still years overdue. Li Yitong, one of UK's COP26 ambassadors, says action is needed.
The youth constituency, we wrote clearly in our opening remarks that we want that $100 billion to be delivered, not in 2023, but now. That is our wish, of course, and also that we want at least 50%, like we always said, to be allocated to adaptation and also to really increase loss and damage.
Kenyan climate activist Elizabeth Ututi is among the campaigners to meet with UN Chief Antonio Guterres on Wednesday. She urged people to recognize what she called the injustices of the climate emergency and act now.
The problem is not about the commitments. The problem is that the gap between what needs to be done and what is being done right now keeps widening every day. And this is not a time to say that we will do this. It's a time to begin making short-term targets, begin doing things right now, because the climate crisis is already impacting so many people.
Zhang Yinyi, CGTN, Glasgow.
Students are packing the streets of the Scottish city to put pressure on leaders. The youth are taking centre stage like never before at this summit. Joining us now is Jakapita Kandacha, a climate justice activist from Namibia. Jakapita, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you. I understand you travelled to Glasgow on board a Greenpeace ship. Tell us about that experience and why it's so important for young people like yourself to be at COP26.
All right, thank you so much for having me. We bought a Greenpeace ship, or we did a collaboration, Paris of Future, with Greenpeace because we felt like our voices are really important at COP, and we chose Greenpeace and the boat action because we feel like we have a lot of islands that are sinking, and it was just like kind of to signify that we arrived at COP, even though we are suffering and we were able to make it. I feel like it's important for young people to be at COP, especially because everything that these world leaders are busy discussing at COP will affect us, and they are directly affecting our futures. Every decision that are made at COP do not really affect their futures, because most of them won't even be here 50, 60 years to come, but we will be here. So we feel like we are here to represent and to just make sure that decisions that are made in the COP are there to protect us in our futures.
So what is your message to world leaders in Glasgow, and what do you hope to achieve?
My message to world leaders in Glasgow is to stop failing us. I want them to, these people, they come here, they have discussions, they make up policies, they agree on policies, but whenever they individually go back to their home countries, they do not follow their own policies. So my message to the world leaders is to start following their own policies. You implement a policy against carbon emission at COP, but then you go back home and you support or you invest your country into oil drilling. So basically, I just want people to do what they preach, especially world leaders.
As we continue our coverage, let's bring in our Washington, D.C.-based panel. Joashwan Nora Jung is a graduate student studying international relations at Johns Hopkins University. Sweta Chakraborty is a risk and behavioral scientist and the president of U.S. operations We Don't Have Time. And Zach Dance is a CGTN digital producer and the creator of The Optimist on TikTok. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. And Zach, let me start with you. We just heard from Jakapita Kandaka, who told us that she doesn't think that conferences like COP26 actually work. It needs to be more open and it has to involve more young people. But there are others who say, look, no matter what, these conferences do focus attention on the climate crisis. What are your thoughts on the conference and on the involvement of more young people?
Well, I absolutely agree that no matter what, we need more young people involved with every single element of the climate crisis altogether. Personally, I've been keeping a lot of attention on social media, and I have seen a lot of young people who have been traveling, climate activists trying to go to Glasgow and participate in the event, not necessarily getting to meet with world leaders, but other people who are involved. So I do think that there are some positive steps being taken.
And you do believe that COP26 has done something this time around?
I sure hope so. That's yet to be seen.
Nora, the Chinese President Xi Jinping issued a written statement to the COP26 conference on climate change. He called on countries to uphold multilateral consensus, focus on concrete actions, and accelerate the green transition. How are young people in China responding to this message?
Young people like me, we feel inspired, and we do agree that we need more ambitious action, commitment, and now we are promoting the green transition in China and the world.
Shweta, world leaders have now left the summit in Glasgow. Now comes the hard part, which is turning those pledges into reality. And let's look at some of those pledges. They pledged to reduce emissions, move away from coal, eliminate deforestation, and deliver money to help poorer countries adapt. What do you make of it? A good start?
This is a step in the right direction, absolutely. We are talking about phasing out coal, despite the fact that US, China, other major polluters of carbon emissions still haven't signed on to that. But coal is in its last days, and that was made very clear by the President Alok Sharma, talking about the future of coal and fossil fuels at large, oil and gas especially. So that is definitely a step in the right direction. Should have been here already, but at least this is being reiterated, and there is much more support behind seeing these fossil fuels really phased out in the foreseeable future and in the coming years.
One of the big platforms this year for young voices on climate change was the Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Carbon Future. The event was organized by the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate and co-hosted by Tsinghua University, Yale and Cambridge, among others. The forum brought together enthusiastic young people from all over the world to share their ideas and concerns about the climate crisis. Let's listen to the Global Youth Climate Declaration from the GWOC Awards ceremony.
It is our mission to fully activate the greatest potential to unlock the net zero future. However, climate-related challenges also exist in all pillars of sustainable development, including nature deterioration, biodiversity loss, energy crisis, and environmental injustice. Therefore, Climate X emphasizes the close interconnection between climate change and other UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and requires synergistic solutions to addressing these challenges. Against this backdrop, youth cooperation to promote synergy in various fields is of vital importance.
The declaration also emphasized that the young generation is a major force and youth must play a vigorous role to achieve a net zero carbon future. Xi Zhenhua, the Chinese Special Climate Envoy, was among the speakers to address students at this year's Global Youth Climate Summit. The virtual event was held from October 25th through October 29th. Let's watch.
Youth play an extremely important role in the course of achieving carbon neutrality goals. You are not only contributors to innovative solutions, but also practitioners to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality and the bearers of climate change risks and losses. The participation of more young people in the course of tackling climate change is a key condition for achieving the goal of carbon neutrality and embarking on a long-term sustainable development path. I hope that you will fully understand the new trends, seize the new opportunities, give full play to your own advantages, and actively take the initiative to better realize yourselves in this revolution.
So, Zach, as we heard, this summit was a chance for young people to engage on the climate crisis. But can forums like this spur the exchange of ideas and innovation among young people?
I sure hope so. I mean, the thing about young people is that we're the ones who have inherited this problem. Even though we haven't done anything to cause this problem, we're the ones who are going to see the long-term issues about it. And young people are frustrated. They're upset. You know, they're tired of lip service from governments and corporations. They want actual movement to happen. And so that's why you see so many people on social media and protesting in the streets who are really just trying to make their voices heard.
Shweta, if there's one thing that distinguishes this particular issue, it's the involvement of young people. But can young people put more pressure on their governments? One has to remember that they're coming up against corporate interests as well.
They absolutely can. We're talking about grassroots efforts on the ground, and COP26 embodies multilateral efforts at the highest echelons of governance. Both of these things have a role to play and must meet somewhere in the middle to actually see local to nation-state wide action take place. So we need the grassroots movements. We need groups like Sunrise. We need 0 Hour. We need Fridays for the Future, led by the youth, and the passion of the youth to then really inspire going up the chain all the way to those multilateral efforts, which will result in countrywide policy that really moves the needle forward on seeing the end of the fossil fuel era. So there are tools that can help young people meet each other virtually and turn these virtual efforts into real-world efforts. Tools like We Don't Have Time is free for individuals to use and has been taken up. And we're seeing on our platform the use of the youth taking advantage of the tool and using it to connect, to share good ideas, to scale solutions. And without the efforts of the youth, a lot of the solutions that we have in the pipeline and that are already here that just need to be better deployed, we're not going to see that go into fruition. So we absolutely need the effort from the youth, and they can move private interests, they can move governance. We're seeing it happen.
Africa has done little to create the climate crisis, yet the famine in Madagascar and water crises in southern Africa are evidence the continent is already paying a price. Ayaka Melithafa is a teenager from South Africa, and she got involved in climate activism after drought impacted her family farm. I asked her why it's so important for young people to get involved.
It's important for young people to get involved in the climate justice battle because we are the ones that are going to inherit the planet. We are the ones that are currently inheriting the planet. And if we don't hold our elders accountable for their mistakes, then we are the ones that are going to be left to clean up a mess that we did not make. And it's quite important that we start now so that we can also help future generations behind us to actually live consciously and build resilience for the fight against the climate inaction that's happening in our countries and in our world.
Global climate activists like yourself say they want to see more leadership on this crisis. They want to see action, not just promises. They want to see leaders act right now in implementing some of the proposals that we agreed to on the Paris Accords. What sort of action would you like to see?
I'd definitely like to see more young people on the streets protesting, asking these difficult questions, partaking in civil activities and making sure that we are active society, we are active citizens in society so that the people that are in places of power are not comfortable and that they hear the wrath of the youth and that they hear our struggle and that they hear our pain. That will urge them to make more impactful change and not just give us lip service because we are truly tired of that.
So, Zach, there's a lot of frustration among young people that global leaders are not acting fast enough. What needs to change?
To be honest with you, Anand, what needs to change is we need some large-scale corporate action and government action. Right now, young people were being told things like, oh, if you drink from a paper straw instead of a plastic straw, you're helping fight climate change. But the reality is, it's like throwing a pebble at an oncoming train. You know, little things that we do that we're being told to make changes in our lives, they're not actually really making meaningful difference. We need legislation. We need large changes. We need certain chemicals and products to be banned, and we need to find other solutions on a large scale. And we need to put pressures on the people who are in power to make these changes happen.
The increase of floods, wildfires and heat waves from climate change is also impacting how we feel. Young people are especially vulnerable to what's known as climate anxiety. The University of Bath and the Stanford Center for Innovation in Global Health interviewed 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25 in 10 countries. Nearly 60% said they were extremely worried or very worried about climate change. I spoke with Caroline Hickman, one of the authors of the study, and asked if anything surprised her.
What did surprise me was the way that their feelings impacted on their thinking. So things like, 56% feeling that humanity was doomed. That was very surprising, was that these feelings extended to that pattern of thinking.
Now, among the countries that you surveyed were India, Brazil, Philippines, and Nigeria. Did you find that opinions varied geographically from one country to the other?
There was certainly geographical variation. Certainly the countries, those 4 countries you've just named, who are facing the immediate impact of climate change, were recording higher levels of anxiety and fear. But what we really noticed was that the emotional response was very similar across all the countries, such as Australia, Brazil, the UK, the US. Children across those countries were averaging 60% discussing anxiety and sadness. What we found that was dramatically different, though, was the impact on daily functioning. So, for example, impact on daily functioning in the UK and the US was 26%, but the impact on daily functioning in the Philippines, Nigeria, was very high. It was affecting over 3/4 of the children and young people, which doesn't surprise us, does it? Because they're facing that daily impact of climate change, whereas living in the West, living in America, it still is frequently perceived as a distant threat rather than happening on a daily basis.
Right, there is a view here that we hear very often. But when you talk about emotional response and the fact that they think that the planet may be doomed, do you get the sense that they've given up, or are they working hard to get this fixed, to get people to do something about it?
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. No, we didn't get the response from young people at all that they were giving up, but that they were keen. This is from the qualitative research. We got the response that they were keen to take action on this and wanted to use that distress to make their voices heard and to either protest through Fridays for Future or any of the other youth strike groups, but to also put pressure on governments and people in power to do something. So there wasn't a high level of nihilism or hopelessness. There was a feeling of frustration, and there were also feelings of abandonment, the feelings that they were being let down by people in power who had the power to act and weren't acting quickly enough.
So, Sweta, we've heard many times that young people feel let down by people in power, but it's also very hard to hear that there are so many young people who believe that the Earth is doomed. What are you hearing from students? How can they channel this frustration?
Well, we're hearing from students, and especially through virtual efforts, because, again, we're still coming out of this pandemic. So a lot of the in-person efforts haven't even really begun to the extent that they will really happen. And so we're really looking forward to seeing a lot of this virtual campaigning materialize in the real world. And that will be a game changer going forward, too. We'll see more mobilization of young people. And in the United States, young people and those who support them. So there's 55 million Americans that identify as alarmed but don't know what to do on climate action. And we're really looking to the young people to mobilize and to help bring in those additional alarmed that want to do something, that just need a little bit of guidance. And it's, again, the young people that are really inspiring that sort of mobilization. So we're moving from virtual to real life. That's really exciting. And we'll see that when we have people come together collectively, locally, at the state level, at the country level, that is ultimately what brings together that group support that deals with some of this eco-anxiety, that deals with this climate anxiety that is very real. And it's something that we can find comfort in, knowing that we're taking action on as a collective. So the more people that are looking to do something and that are feeling uneasy about the future, knowing that there is a support system and there's action to be taken can really help address some of that anxiety. So that should improve as we see more real-world action taking place.
Nora, as a young activist from China, how do you feel about the climate crisis? You know, it's going to be your generation that's going to be inheriting the planet, but do you feel optimistic, or do you also feel let down, a bit pessimistic?
Well, I would say both. Like, generally, I'm quite optimistic. I'm also conscious, and I know that we still have a long way to go. There's a huge gap between our commitment around the world so far and the 1.5-degree goal set by the Paris Agreement and PCC. But I'm still optimistic because I went to Milan this September to attend the Youth for Climate-Driven Ambition event as part of the pre-COP. And there I met more than 300 global delegates. And we had really constructive conversations, and we drew a declaration of new youth commitment and youth ambition on climate change. And in China, now I'm also working for the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate. I attended, I would say I participated in preparing the youth summit, and I participated in the voice track of the summit. So I got a lot of chances to be part of the youth climate actions and this activism. So, but generally, I'm quite optimistic, and I believe that our generation will fix the problem. But I do hope that before we took over the world, the global leaders now can make more ambitious actions and commitments.
This year's COP26 Climate Summit builds on a legally binding agreement, including China, Russia and the United States, signed 6 years ago in Paris. Since then, we've seen record-breaking heat, drought and flooding. Let's listen to Harvard professor Robert Stevens.
I think that in the context of the Paris Agreement, the best thing that could be done would be to make sure that we facilitate increased ambition over time of the nationally determined contributions, and do that by seeking ways to lower cost, which will encourage greater ambition if the cost per unit is lower. And the best way to do that, in fact, the only way within the Paris Climate Agreement, is through Article 6.2 of the 29 articles. And that's linkage. And so that is why precisely that the negotiations in Glasgow on Article 6 are going to be so important. So if one was going to watch only one part of what happens in Glasgow, that would be the part to watch, in my opinion.
Sweta, given the coronavirus pandemic and how it's drained budgets around the world, can countries commit enough funding to fight the climate crisis?
The question here is really what happens if countries don't commit enough funding to confront the climate crisis. It is cheaper now, it's going to get more expensive tomorrow and more expensive every day after that. And it was much cheaper a decade ago had we done it then. The cost of proactively preparing for the impacts of climate change, adapting to the impacts that we're locked into, and mitigating against the worst case scenarios and more increased frequency and intensity and simultaneous events occurring, that is what we want to offset, because that is a future we cannot afford. So despite the hit that we've taken because of the coronavirus, and despite what seems like very hefty price tags on individual countries adapting to this new warming that we're locked into, it is only going to get more expensive from here the longer we wait to put in the proper resources and time and attention and personnel to actually offset a worser future. So the time to act is now. It might seem expensive, but it is far cheaper to do it sooner than later.
At the Boer Forum for Asia in April, China pledged to strictly limit coal consumption over the next 5 years. It's the latest step in Beijing's efforts to reduce carbon emissions. Climate scientist John Walsh has more on what China is doing. Let's watch.
Well, my understanding is that China is actually progressing at a more rapid rate towards energy efficiency, towards climate change mitigation, in comparison with many countries, many other countries in the world, including the US. And I think China is doing that through the application of technology. The railroad system in China is one example. It's an excellent example of a movement towards more efficient, more energy efficient transportation. On the other hand, the challenge that China faces is that its population is so large. So there's more inertia in the system, so to speak, to change the way in which energy is used. Coal has been a large part of the energy infrastructure in China in the past, so that the fact that the population is so large means that China's challenge is greater. It has, in a sense, a higher mountain to climb, but I do believe it's climbing the mountain at a more rapid rate than many of the other countries in the world.
Nora, how is China moving away from its traditional dependence on coal?
Well, first I would say it's really challenging and ambitious for China to get rid of the reliance on coal, considering coal is such an efficient and cheap source of energy, and is deeply penetrated in China's energy system. So this year, China committed to stop building new coal plants overseas. And last year, China committed to reach carbon peaking by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. So these targets are really ambitious and really hard to achieve. And now China is mainly doing two things. One is get rid of the coal, mainly including stop trying to reduce the new built coal plants and gradually get rid of those high energy consuming and high emitting small coal plants in the nation. And on the other hand, China is still trying to promote the renewable energy. China now is the country in the world with the largest installed capacity of renewable energy, but China now is still trying to develop wind and solar, both concentrated and distributed, and nuclear power, hydropower, and biomass fuel. China is also reforming its grid and energy system to be more robust, enough to contain all these variable renewable energy sources like wind and solar.
When it comes to coverage of the climate crisis, is the media doing enough? Let's listen to Alexei Nikolov, the managing editor of Russia Today. Here's what he had to say.
We all keep talking about global warming, about the threats, about the challenges. What I think we may do better, all of us, is to bring in a little bit more responsibility. I personally do not think it's right to put on air just any person who claims to be an expert or who people who are competing to scare you as much as they can. I don't think they should be on air, quite honestly. People whose only input, whose only strong point is their ability to scare the audience are not necessarily the people who understand. I think we should have more scientists who have more scientific, and I stress scientific discussion. We should bring in more experts, and I stress real experts, not the ones who cry the loudest. This is definitely, and being more open.
So, Sweta, what are your thoughts on the role the media is playing, or perhaps the role they should be playing?
Well, as much as I want to agree with him, basically because of the plug for scientists, and as a scientist, I appreciate that, we definitely need more credible experts on air and generally consistently speaking the facts and the data and the truth to the public, to those who represent them. That being said, we know from communication science that people don't necessarily care about the actual numbers, about the actual data, about the actual science. That's important to make sure that the information being presented is credible and it's based in empirical evidence. But ultimately, the best way to reach the masses, to ensure that we see behavioral change that accurately confronts and commensurates with the reality of the climate crisis and the real risks that individuals and communities are facing, is for these messages to come from credible, trusted authorities. And so whether that's a scientist or otherwise, the main point here is that those who are represented in the media really need to be credible and need to be trusted by the end recipients. And here's another point just to stress, is we are seeing oil and gas really put forward disinformation campaigns that take full advantage of greenwashing and really give platforms to alleged experts that don't deserve it, and they do scare, but in the opposite direction. And they do put forward information that appears to be credible, but isn't. So there needs to be due diligence by the media to make sure that the sources of information are credible, absolutely, and that it's not disinformation being spread, and it's, just because it's the loudest, it's being heard. That's dangerous. That's where we really need to make sure the media is doing its job. But otherwise, the important thing here is to remember that it's a trusted authority who is credible that really reaches the public. That's what's most important.
Zach, you do a lot of work on social media, raising awareness about common misconceptions. You do a lot of work educating people as well, as we've just seen. You do a great job on that. But is there a role for the legacy media on raising the bar on our awareness about climate change, or is it all up to social media?
Well, I have to say, overall, I really agree with what Sweta was saying. I mean, it's important that the most important thing is that we have the correct information that's getting out there. Is it the role of social media? Is it the role of what we would call traditional media? Honestly, for everyone, whatever platform you have where you can spread correct information and you can make sure that the things that you're saying are actually correct scientifically, that information, it needs to be shared. People need to band together, and there's something that we can all do to help spread awareness about what needs to change and individual things that we can do.
It won't be easy or cheap, but there are things countries can do now. Nobel award-winning economist Paul Romer says it begins with innovation. Let's watch.
The best thing every country can do right now is try and encourage technological change. If we had to stop emitting carbon with existing technologies, we would have to go through a very sharp reduction in our use of energy, and that would reduce our quality of lives. But if we can innovate and come up with newer kinds of energy systems that are not as carbon intensive, we get the benefits of protecting the environment and the benefits of energy that lets us do what we want. We've seen this already, for example, in the very sharp declines in the price of photovoltaics for generating electricity from sun. We've seen it in a fall in the price of generating electricity from wind. The biggest problem that remains to be solved is storage, so that when those intermittent sources of electricity aren't available, we can call on our storage reserves. So if every country creates incentives for the innovation that will give us the better solutions, we'll all be ahead.
Sweta, Paul Romer is calling it a tech revolution, but I'm wondering, is it practical or feasible when we look at how dependent we've become on hydrocarbons?
We really can say all of the above here. We've gotten solar and wind down to the point where it's affordable. Now that capacity building through batteries can really see mass scaling of these renewable technologies. And it's that deployment that we need to get behind and support. We're not far off from it. At the same time, in terms of tech revolution, there is so much innovation in the pipeline. We've got nuclear options. We have clean hydrogen options. We have technologies we have only begun to research and put development resources into. And that's the kind of thing that can materialize and must in the coming decades, because at some point, we're talking right now about getting carbon neutral, but at some point, we will need to get carbon negative. And that's something we need to remember and keep our eye on. So the technologies we have today, we need to better deploy, and we can absolutely see through a tech revolution that takes us even a step further, sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and getting us to a temperature point where our entire species is truly thriving. That is the direction we are heading, and we need to support all of these different tools in our toolkit, from existing technologies to new technologies in the pipeline.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for a very interesting and engaging discussion. For more of our GAI content, check out our website at www.globalactioninitiative.com. You'll find full episodes of all our daily shows, exclusive documentaries focused on climate change, speeches and interviews with our VIP guests, and feature stories on everyday heroes fighting to save the planet. And if you're really in a hurry, just scan the QR code with your mobile phone. To solve the climate crisis, it will require action from not only governments, but also businesses, from corporations to startups. For more on solutions, let's turn to my colleague, the host of CGTN's Global Business, Rachel Akufo.
Now, Anand, advertisers will tell you a diamond is forever, but so is the pollution it generates. It's a dirty business by any industry standard and adds harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Well, CGTN's climate reporter Gabriel Yue-Yin discovered one company that's offering a clean alternative. Gabriel joins us now to explain. Hi, Gabriel.
Hi, Rochelle. Yes, exactly. I had the chance to visit a startup company in New York City called Ether Diamond. And the company says that it's producing the same sparkling gems out of laboratory and cleaning the air. Let's take a look.
In a WeWork space in New York City, there is a startup company selling diamonds that literally come from the air, enabled by a technology that captures carbon dioxide pollutants from the air and compresses them into diamonds.
So for every individual carat of diamonds that we sell, we will offset and permanently sequester 20 metric tons. So that equates to 1.25 years of your carbon footprint for the average American.
This business idea grew out of the very flaws of the diamond industry. Global diamond mines are drying up, threatening future supplies of raw diamonds. This, as diamond mining has always been criticized for its environmental costs, the extraction process polluting the surrounding soil, water, and air. The energy sources used also release huge amounts of carbon into the air.
If you ask me, I wouldn't say we're a diamond company. I wouldn't say we're a jewelry company. We're a carbon tech company. These are the first carbon negative diamonds. We are driving a net positive impact. Every time we produce a diamond, we set out to make sure that we were doing this in a way that would catch people's attention, it would inspire consumers and play into certain trends that we see in the market today.
One of these trends is the market recognition of what's called the lab-grown diamonds, which were once regarded as low-rank or even fake, although they have the exact same atomic structure as naturally formed diamonds. In 2018, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission officially recognized the quality of these lab-grown diamonds, and the public acceptance of lab-grown diamonds had also risen significantly during the past decade. And another market trend is the growing percentage of young consumers in the business.
Younger consumers typically tend to be a little bit more sustainably minded, eco-conscious, and they expect to understand where the things they buy come from. And I think that's really important as you understand who is buying diamond jewelry. It's actually skewing younger and younger. So we're playing into these trends in a way that we hope is the best possible combination for the consumer, for our company, and for the planet.
So, Gabriel, do we know at this point how much of a difference the company has made in terms of climate mitigation, and how popular are carbon-negative diamonds?
I think the idea of a carbon-negative diamond might be more popular than the actual carbon-negative diamonds themselves, because when you think about it, how much carbon can a small diamond store in itself is pretty limited. But the idea of carbon-negative diamond can just sparkle this public awareness of, taking climate action. And I think, specifically what's interesting about this business case, and especially why we started to do this report, is because it's a perfect illustration of how business greens itself. We talk about young people as consumers, and they are one of the major stakeholders for business, and their preferences, like mentioned in the material, there are more awareness of the externalities of companies, and it's changing the game. And this startup plays into this trend, and at the same time is pressuring the traditional players of the industry to make a change. So what we're seeing here is that it's really how this younger generation come into the major consumer group and is changing the business game of it. And I think this could be far more powerful than how much a diamond can store carbon.
And clearly having these questions is really, having these manufacturers really considering what they do. Now, Gabriel, I understand you've talked with several leaders about the role of young people on climate action, including Jürgen Vogel, the Vice President for Sustainable Development at the World Bank.
Yes, we did. We certainly talk about how young people are going to, be the major topic of this, because they are the ones that are going to endure the consequences of climate change and the ones to take action. And the Vice President of the World Bank Group actually shared his thoughts on the climate crisis and how young people are the key to finding the solution. Let's take a look.
We have learned over the last 20 years that there is an incredible potential in young people to be creative, innovative, and come up with ideas and solutions that weren't there before. We've seen it in the technology side, but I think we can also see that the policy side in different other contexts. The youth are really organizing themselves. So they're building groups, they have policy forums, They're creating summits. They come with statements, with political statements that they put together. And I think that is one way of moving the message forward, right? It is not only individual action. It is actually what are the key messages coming out of a global movement. And this movement is global now, right? I mean, in every country you have youth movements to sort of really galvanize and crystallize the messages and put them in front of the policymakers. They have to have a seat at the table.
You can watch this entire interview with the Vice President of the World Bank Group on our website, america.cgtn.com. Rochelle.
All right, thank you. Always so good to hear about this climate-conscious consumer that's steadily emerging. Thank you so much. All right, back to you, Anand.
Thanks, Rochelle. Over the past few days, we've examined in detail some of the most critical threats of climate change. We've talked about policy and personal stories, challenges and solutions. As we wind down our programming, here's our declaration, the Global Media Strategic Framework on Climate Action.
The message we are receiving is very clear, that no one is safe until everyone is safe.
If everyone would assume their responsibilities as agreed upon, we will be able to save the planet Earth, because simply we have no other planet, no option B.
To fight climate change, we must also reject isolationism and geopolitical tension. We must confront poverty, violence, injustice, and corruption. We must reaffirm our collective commitment to multilateralism.
作为国际主流媒体和中国国家广播电视台，中央广播电视总台始终秉持负责任媒体的职责使命，努力提高公众对生态文明建设的关注与认知。人不负青山，青山定不负人。 让我们行动起来，让地球恢复健康，让共识替代旗舰，共同构建地球生命共同体，守护好我们共有的家园。
There's simply no time left to waste. The climate crisis is impacting all of us. We need to act immediately to reach global targets to curb carbon emission and global warming. We must be committed to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. We urgently need to balance economic development with environmental protection. And in addition to ensuring multilateral cooperation, we must maximize individual actions and increase corporate participation in mitigating the crisis.
This is The World Today.
Hello there, welcome to CGTN. I'm Mike Walter in Washington.
As a media organization, we believe all media have a role to play in global climate action.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is calling for strong action to tackle the climate challenge.
In our 2021 Global Action Initiative, we've focused on several facets of the climate crisis. Number 1, the extent of the crisis. Number 2, potential solutions. Number 3, attempts to preserve biodiversity and ecosystems. Number 4, efforts by ordinary world citizens. Number 5, contributions by young people. We invite our global media partners to join us in the immediate establishment of a global alliance of media on climate, to exponentially increase our combined influence to help accelerate global climate actions. Let us find common ground together by building a framework for climate action to include prioritizing climate-related reporting to raise public awareness, sharing resources on climate reporting to better fulfill the role of media's social responsibility, organizing joint media events to enhance public engagement and to encourage community building, collaborating on amplifying young people's voices to engage youth as a major part of the climate crisis solution, strengthening collaboration across all media platforms to become a unified source for providing credible information, sharing media resources with academic and business communities, as well as international NGOs and for-profit organizations to augment climate issue initiatives. Working together to ensure authenticity in journalism to combat climate crisis misinformation and demagoguery.
Thanks to all our guests for all their insights on the climate crisis and potential solutions. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Next, the premiere of the CGTN documentary 0 Hour, Africa and Latin America.